I turned 65 on a Tuesday in Maple Grove, Ohio, and all I wanted was charcoal, ribeyes, and a reason to laugh with 2 old friends on my back porch. I had the list in my hand: beer, steaks, corn, briquettes, written big enough that my tired eyes wouldn't pretend they'd forgotten. Sunlight came through the kitchen window and landed on a stack of unpaid kindnesses I'd kept for years. Could you give me a quick ride to Wagner's Market? I asked. Casual as weather. Emily didn't look up from her phone. Are you serious, Dad? It's 5 minutes. Gus and Dave are coming over tonight. I'll grab everything. And Tyler wandered in, Apple Watch buzzing like it had more authority than I did. We're not your Uber, Mark. I didn't say. Emily finally raised her eyes, and the look was winter. You're just a burden, Dad. On our shoulders. All the time. The word hit harder because it was simple. Burden. No metaphor. No way to pretend I'd misheard. I stared at the list. Beer. Steaks. Corn. Briquettes. 4 words that suddenly felt like a closed fist unclenching. It's my birthday, I said, and even to my own ears it sounded like a child reminding a parent they promised cake. She laughed short, surgical. That doesn't change anything. Boundaries. Tyler added, as if he'd invented the term. You can't just invite people here and expect us to do logistics. She wants due to the res. I looked around the kitchen I paid to remodel when their bonus didn't land. The quartz counters I'd chosen because Emily loved cool white. The mortgage I'd shouldered the year Tyler's app went belly up. The will I hadn't updated since my wife died. Because grief makes you forget that paperwork can be a loaded weapon. Logistics, I repeated, tasting steel. I'll order a cab. Emily rolled her eyes. Don't be dramatic. I wasn't. I opened my banking app out of habit. Accounts were fine. The authorized users list still had 2 names that shouldn't have been there. A note to self formed like a storm cloud. Clean house cards, beneficiaries, everything. Not today, but soon. Tyler leaned on the island and lowered his voice like a man practicing gaslighting 101. We take care of you, Mark. Roof, utilities, food. You can't keep acting like this is your playground. I didn't trust my mouth. So I put my list in my pocket and nodded. I'll be out of your hair in 10. His smile said I'd admitted guilt to a crime he invented. On my way to the door, my phone buzzed. Emily, text. If you're buying stuff, reimburse us for the last 2 months' utilities. Me. We can talk receipts later. Emily. We shouldn't have to keep asking. Tyler. And stop using the joint card for your things. Joint. That was generous. The statements were a museum of my enabling. Tuition, the down payment, the AirPods birthday he said he needed for interviews, airline miles I earned and never used because somebody always had a work emergency that needed my card. I stood on the mat and thought about the will tucked in my lockbox, about the deed still in my name because the refinancing stalled, about the folder in my closet labeled TAX 2013-2024, stacked with line item proof that I had been an enabler dressed as a father. Written evidence isn't sentimental. It doesn't lie. It waits. Dad, Emily said behind me, voice suddenly soft. Practice soft. You know we love you. But you can't keep putting this on us. And the braided and flessed. This is what toxic sounds like when it wants applause. Cruelty wrapped in concern. Love without respect is control, I said. I didn't raise my voice. Control without consent is abuse. And abuse dressed up as boundaries is just a narcissist's costume. Tyler snorted. You reading Instagram therapy quotes now? Just my bank statements, I said. He stepped closer, a posture I remembered from when he asked for a short-term bridge loan. Let's not make this ugly. It's already ugly, I said. You just don't want it written down. I left, called a cab. The driver had old vinyl seats and the kind of silence that's merciful. At Wagner's, I bought exactly what was on the list and paid cash, because cash doesn't text you at midnight to say you're ungrateful. The cashier bagged everything like it mattered. People who do honest work usually do. Back home, I seasoned the steaks, set the corn to soak, lined up the briquettes. Gus and Dave came at 6 with a 6-pack and stories. For an hour, the air tasted like summer instead of judgment. Emily and Ty joining? Gus asked, not unkindly. I invited them, I said. The open window carried their voices from the living room. No thanks, Emily called, bright and bored. We're not in the mood for a senior social. Tyler added, "Enjoy your geriatric cookout." We ate anyway. We laughed anyway. Then the night thinned and the plates were empty and my friends hugged me like I wasn't disposable. When the door closed, Emily and Tyler were waiting, arms crossed, verdict faces on. That's when the birthday ended and the inventory began. Utilities, house rules, what I was allowed to decide about my own life under a roof I paid for. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I looked at the list in my pocket, at the ink smudge by Briquettes, and I understood. I hadn't lost my voice. I'd rented it out at a discount. The lease was up. Later that evening, there would be a click, a small, ordinary sound that would change everything. But first, there was this. The truth I finally believed, without needing anyone's permission. I wasn't the burden here. I was the bank. And the bank was about to close. The next morning, the air on Maple Street felt heavy, like even the robins had decided to stay quiet. I stood by the curb with 2 grocery bags and an ache behind my ribs that had nothing to do with age. The taxi that dropped me off the night before waited again, engine idling. The driver gave me the same polite nod, the kind people give when they know you've had a rough night but won't ask why. Inside the house, everything was exactly where I'd left it. Clean, silent, efficient. The way Tyler liked it. The smell of last night's charcoal still lingered on my jacket. I washed my hands, looked around the kitchen, and decided I'd still make that barbecue. Not for them anymore. For me, and for the 2 friends who remembered what friendship without debt looked like. I set out the plates, the same ones my late wife had picked years ago, back when we still hosted Thanksgivings that didn't end in spreadsheets and who's paying for what. I marinated the steaks, cut the corn, and turned on the old radio just to fill the air. A little Willie Nelson, something human. At 5 sharp, Gus and Dave arrived with their usual unplanned coordination. Gus carried a 6-pack of Miller High Life. Dave had a bag of chips big enough to feed an army. "Happy 65, old man," Dave said, clapping my shoulder. "Don't remind me," I said. But I was smiling. For a moment, it felt almost normal. We grilled under the maple tree that gave the street its name, smoke curling up through the branches like a signal flare for anyone still believing in second chances. The laughter came easy at first. Then Gus, ever the blunt one, asked, "Emily and Ty coming out? Or they too fancy for backyard meat now?" Before I could answer, the back door opened. Emily's voice carried out, bright and sharp. "No thanks, Dad. We're not in the mood for a senior social. Wouldn't be deadery." Tyler added, "Enjoy your nostalgia party." The door closed with a click that felt final. Gus muttered something under his breath. Dave looked away. We kept grilling, but the silence that followed was louder than any insult. You know that moment when your friends try to pretend they didn't hear something humiliating? They talk louder, laugh too hard, change the subject to weather or sports. That's what they did. I appreciated it. Still, I could feel their pity hanging in the air, thick as smoke. After dinner, Gus offered to help clean up. I told him I had it covered. He looked at me long, the way a friend does when he knows you're lying. "You ever need a place to crash, you knock on my door," he said quietly. "Don't let 'em gaslight you into thinking this is normal. I'm fine." I lied again. When they left, I stacked the plates, folded the tablecloth, and blew out the citronella candle. Inside, the living room light was on. Emily and Tyler were waiting like HR reps about to deliver bad news. "Nice party," Emily said, the sarcasm as thin as glass. "Did your friends enjoy our electricity?" "I paid the bill," I said. Tyler smirked. "You're missing the point. This is our house, Mark. You can't just invite people whenever you want." "Our house?" I repeated, feeling something crack open in my chest. "Funny, the mortgage company still sends the statements to me." "That's just paperwork," Emily snapped. "We make the rules now. And if you can't respect that, then maybe you need somewhere else to live." Tyler finished for her, arms folded like he'd practiced the line in the mirror. For a second, I thought they were joking. Then I saw it, the satisfaction of power on their faces. That was the moment the house stopped being home. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I just nodded, walked upstairs, and started packing a small suitcase. My hands didn't even shake. Every folded shirt felt like a confession. Years of enabling, tucked neatly away. When I zipped the bag, I felt lighter, not heavier. Downstairs, I placed my house key on the coffee table. The metal hit the wood with that same sharp click from last night's door. It didn't sound like defeat. It sounded like release. I looked at them one last time. "You'll figure it out," I said, and for the first time in years, I walked out of that house without apologizing for existing. The porch light followed me halfway down the walkway, then flicked off behind me. Maple Street looked the same as always, porches glowing, sprinklers ticking, but it wasn't home anymore. It was just real estate. You ever notice how freedom doesn't start with a shout, it starts with a sound? For me, it was a click. The soft, metallic tap of a house key landing on a coffee table in the home I bought, paid off, and was just told I no longer belonged in. That sound followed me all night. I heard it in the hum of the taxi engine, in the automatic doors of the motel off Highway 71, in the way my phone buzzed with unanswered texts from Emily and Tyler, each one a new attempt at guilt, control, or both. The driver dropped me at the Maple Grove Motel, small, quiet, the kind of place you stay in when you need to disappear but can't afford to vanish. The neon sign buzzed faintly. Vacancy. I checked in under my own name. It felt good to do something simple. Something mine. Room 9 smelled like lemon cleaner and lost weekends. I set my suitcase on the bed, sat down, and just breathed. The silence wasn't peaceful yet. It was raw. But raw is where healing starts. I took out my wallet, spread out a few things on the nightstand: driver's license, insurance card, the checkbook Emily once called old-fashioned, and a photo of my wife, Linda, from our trip to Yellowstone. She'd hated being photographed, said cameras stole moments instead of keeping them. But she'd smiled for me that day. I could almost hear her voice now. "Mark, you always take care of everyone. When do you take care of yourself?" "Never, apparently." I looked at my phone again. Dozens of messages. Emily. "Dad, we didn't mean it like that. You overreacted." Tyler. "We just need boundaries. We'll talk tomorrow." Emily. "Don't do anything stupid with the accounts." Tyler. "If you touch the savings, we'll have to intervene legally." There it was. Not "Are you okay?" Not "We're sorry." Just control wrapped in concern. Toxic people never apologize. They reframe. That's how gaslighting works. You start doubting your own memory of pain. But I remembered every word, every look, every bill I paid that made their lives easier, while mine got smaller. I deleted the thread, turned off notifications, and pulled out a notepad from the motel drawer. At the top, I wrote, Phase 1, take back what's mine. Bird, freeze joint cards, change account passwords, review will, contact bank Monday morning, call Gus, witness, simple, cold, necessary. I fell asleep to the sound of trucks passing on the highway, and for the first time in years, I slept all the way through the night. No noise, no footsteps upstairs, no fake apologies. When morning light slipped through the curtains, I felt awake. Not just rested, awake in the kind of way that makes you see your whole life like an evidence board in a courtroom. Who took what, when, and why? I dressed, buttoned my shirt, and looked in the mirror above the motel sink. My reflection looked older, sure, but steadier too. I whispered to myself, "You're not crazy. You're not cruel. You're just done." At breakfast, I sat at the diner next door, coffee, 2 eggs, dry toast. The waitress called me on and refilled my cup before I could ask. That tiny act of kindness hit harder than it should have. I realized how starved I'd been for basic respect. While I stirred sugar into my coffee, I logged into my bank app. The joint card, the one they used for house expenses, was active, sitting at a balance that looked suspiciously low. I hit freeze access before I could second-guess myself. A notification pinged a minute later. Emily. Dad. My card just got declined. I smiled. That was the sound of the first domino falling. Outside, the sun climbed higher, and for the first time in months, the day felt like it belonged to me. I paid my check in cash just like the groceries and walked back toward the motel. Gus called as I crossed the parking lot. "You okay, buddy?" "I think so," I said. "I think I'm finally starting to be." "Good," he said. "Don't let them talk you out of it. They'll try. People like that always do." "I know," I said. "They're good at guilt. I was a good student." He laughed, low and rough. "Then it's time to unlearn." That night, I took out my keyring, stared at the empty spot where the house key used to hang. It felt lighter without it. Freedom always does. I set the keys on the nightstand next to Linda's photo. You were right, I told her. I never took care of myself. But I'm learning. Outside, the motel sign flickered from red to white, humming softly in the Ohio night. Somewhere down Maple Street, I imagined Emily and Tyler arguing over whose fault it was, dialing numbers that no longer worked, pacing a house that wasn't theirs to begin with. That was fine. Let them fight over ghosts. I had one sound left echoing in my head, the click of that key hitting the table, and for the first time, it didn't hurt. It sounded like a door unlocking somewhere else. The Maple Grove Motel wasn't the kind of place you bragged about staying in. The carpet had a stubborn smell of bleach and cigarettes, and the walls were thin enough to hear the couple next door arguing about coupons at midnight. But to me, it felt like sanctuary. No voices calling me ungrateful. No footsteps pacing above me. No invisible meter running on my self-worth. Just quiet. I woke early, sunlight slipping through faded curtains like cautious forgiveness. The clock said 7:12. For a moment, I forgot where I was, then remembered. I was finally somewhere that was mine, even if it was rented by the night. I made coffee with the motel's tiny machine. It tasted like burnt cardboard, but freedom has its own flavor. As it dripped, I took out the notepad from the night before. At the top of the page, the ink had bled slightly overnight. Phase 1. Take back what's mine. The first item on the list was underlined twice. Freeze joint cards. I grabbed my jacket and called a cab. Downtown Maple Grove was half-awake trucks unloading bread, retirees walking dogs, the American flag outside the courthouse moving lazily in the morning breeze. The taxi driver dropped me in front of First National Bank. It looked the same as it had for 20 years. Gray columns, glass doors, and that faint smell of polished floors and quiet authority. Inside, I walked to the counter. The teller was a middle-aged woman with a name tag that read Patricia. She smiled politely, not knowing that she was about to help me start over. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you?" "I need to make some changes," I said. "Remove 2 authorized users from my accounts, Emily Carter and Tyler Carter." Her fingers paused over the keyboard. "Your children?" "My daughter and her husband, yes." She gave me that careful look bankers reserve for moments like this, part sympathy, part professionalism. "We can do that, sir. I'll just need your ID." I handed it over, and for the next 15 minutes, I signed papers that felt like tiny acts of rebellion. Each signature was a small cut in the web they'd wrapped me in. When Patricia finished, she slid the forms across the counter. "These changes take effect immediately. Any linked cards will be frozen until new authorization." "Perfect," I said. "Thank you." Walking out of that bank, the air felt different, thinner, cleaner. Like I'd been holding my breath for years without realizing it. I wasn't just taking back money. I was taking back oxygen. I called another cab, and as I settled into the back seat, my phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times. I didn't need to look to know who it was. By the 4th ring, I picked up. "Dad, what the hell did you do?" Emily's voice burst through the line. "My card was declined at Target." I looked like an idiot in front of everyone. "Hello to you too," I said. "Don't you dare take that tone with me. You're being ridiculous. We had bills to pay." "Bills that I never saw," I said quietly. "Groceries for 3, electricity, streaming services I don't use. Somehow, the man you called a burden is still the one keeping your lights on." "That's not fair," she shouted. "We take care of you." I almost laughed. "By taking my house and my peace? You're confusing caretaking with control, sweetheart. They're not the same thing." Tyler's voice came next, sharp and self-righteous. "You can't just pull this kind of stunt without talking to us first." "It's talking," I said. "You mean the kind where you tell me how grateful I should be to live in the home I paid for?" Silence. Then Tyler tried again. "You're overreacting. You're not thinking straight. That's what you say when someone stops being your ATM," I said. "But don't worry. You'll adjust." Emily's voice cracked now. Less rage, more panic. "Dad, please. We have expenses. You can't just cut us off. I can, I said softly. And I just did. Before she could reply, I ended the call. The phone buzzed again, immediately 5, 6, 7 times, but I let it ring. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Everything okay back there? I smiled, small and honest, getting better by the minute. When I got back to the motel, I opened my wallet and stared at my driver's license. The man in the photo looked tired, uncertain. I placed it next to the list and wrote one more line beneath Phase 1. Phase 2. Rewrite the will. Outside, the Ohio sun was shining like it hadn't in weeks. I poured the rest of my motel coffee into the sink, watched it swirl down the drain, and realized I didn't need it anymore. I was wide awake. I spent most of that morning sitting on the motel bed, the TV murmuring some talk show I wasn't really watching. My phone lay silent on the nightstand, a flat piece of plastic that had finally run out of power to hurt me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like answering to anyone, but I also didn't know what came next. That's when my neighbor, Gus Miller, called. Gus was the kind of guy who never said, "How are you?" unless he really wanted the truth. "You still breathing, Bennett?" he asked. "Barely," I said. "I'm at the Maple Grove Motel." He whistled. "Classy. You plan on staying there forever or just until the apocalypse?" "I haven't thought that far ahead," I said. "Well, you need to. You can't just sit there drinking motel coffee and pretending this'll fix itself. You need someone who knows the system." "The system?" "Lawyers, Mark. Find one. Before those two file something stupid like claiming you're mentally unfit. You gave them power once, don't let them take the rest." Gus had a point. I'd been so focused on the emotional wreckage, I hadn't even thought about the legal kind. He texted me a number a few minutes later. Ava Morales, estate and trust attorney. "Call her," he said. "She's sharp, and she doesn't scare easy." I hesitated, then dialed. Her voice was calm, measured, like someone used to walking into chaos and rearranging it alphabetically. She offered to meet that afternoon. Her office sat above an insurance agency on Main Street, no marble floors, no fancy lobby, just a brass plate with her name on the door. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. She motioned for me to sit. "I read your message," she said. "You mentioned you recently removed family members from your accounts. That's a good start. Tell me the rest." So I did. The birthday, the insults, the key on the table, how I'd left without another word. She listened without interrupting, pen tapping lightly against a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "You know what this is, right?" A bad family sitcom?" "It's financial abuse," she said flatly. "Happens more than you think. Adult children manipulating an aging parent, blurring guilt with obligation. You've been the provider, the enabler, and they built their lives around that." I sat there, staring at my hands. I let them. Maybe I wanted to feel needed. "That's not weakness," she said. "That's love weaponized by people who knew exactly how to use it." Her words landed hard. She wasn't pitying me. She was diagnosing me. "Here's what we'll do," she continued. "First, we secure your assets. I'll review the house deed and confirm whose name is on the mortgage. Next, we rewrite your will and create a living trust that directs your estate toward causes you care about without giving them another penny." I blinked. "That sounds final." "Final is good," Ava said. "Final means control." "Oh." She handed me a checklist. Tax returns, account statements, old receipts, even text messages. The more proof you have of financial dependency, the stronger your position. Courts don't like parasites. That word parasites felt both cruel and accurate. Before I left, she looked me in the eye. "One more thing, Mark. Whatever they call you next, ungrateful, vindictive, crazy, don't respond. Silence makes narcissists panic. They can't stand losing the audience." Her tone was calm, but her eyes burned with something personal. As I stepped out of her office, I realized how rare it was to meet someone who saw through the fog immediately. She didn't see a helpless old man. She saw a man reclaiming his boundaries. Back at the motel, I updated my notepad. Under Phase 2, I wrote, "Consulted Ava Morales. Start will revision, trust setup, and beneath that, one more line Gus would have appreciated. Find a lawyer who sounds like she's already won. That night, I couldn't sleep. The motel room was quiet, but my mind wasn't. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the air conditioner humming like a tired witness. Every conversation with Emily and Tyler replayed itself in my head, every favor, every guilt trip, every moment I thought I was helping when really, I was handing over another piece of myself. It hit me hard, this uncomfortable question that I'd spent years avoiding. Was I enabling them? The answer came quicker than I wanted. Yes, I was. Every check I'd written, every bill I'd covered, every problem I'd solved, it wasn't love anymore. It was maintenance. I was maintaining their comfort at the expense of my sanity. I'd mistaken generosity for virtue, but it had turned into addiction, not theirs, mine. I was addicted to being needed. When my wife Linda was alive, she used to warn me about that. Mark, she'd say, you can't fix people who profit from being broken. I'd smile, tell her she was being too harsh. Turns out, she saw it long before I did. Ava's words from earlier that day kept echoing. Love weaponized by people who knew how to use it. I kept turning that sentence over in my head. Emily had mastered emotional accounting, paying me an attention only when it bought her leverage. And Tyler, well, he'd learned the art of guilt better than any preacher. I opened my notebook again, the same one with the scribbled list. Phase 2. Rewrite the will. Beneath it, I wrote a new line. Stop confusing forgiveness with permission. That was the heart of it. I kept forgiving them for crossing lines because I was too scared to draw new ones. And that's how toxic families survive, not through hate, but through habit. I sat up, turned on the bedside lamp, and looked around the tiny motel room. It was nothing fancy, peeling wallpaper, a rickety chair, a buzzing light fixture, but it was mine. My name on the receipt, my rules, my peace. Freedom doesn't always look glamorous. Sometimes it looks like a cheap room with a working lock and no one shouting from the other side. Then came the guilt, the old reflex that always followed any moment of clarity. They're your kids, Mark. You raised them. Maybe you owe them another chance. I almost laughed. That's what an enabler's brain sounds like. Always trying to turn pain into a project. But I wasn't a project manager anymore. I whispered to the empty room, half prayer, half confession. It's time to stop feeling guilty and start fighting back. Those words felt dangerous, but also necessary. Like stepping into cold water and realizing you're still alive. I didn't know exactly what fighting back would look like yet. Maybe it was legal, maybe emotional, maybe both. But it would start with one simple act. No more apologies for protecting my peace. I turned off the lamp, lay back down, and for the first time in decades, I didn't dream about saving anyone. I dreamed about starting over. By the next morning, the decision didn't feel impulsive anymore. It felt overdue. The bank had already confirmed the freeze on all joint cards, and Ava had sent over digital forms to begin transferring control of the remaining accounts exclusively back to me. The process was clean, procedural, almost surgical, like cauterizing a wound that had bled for too long. But I still had one last loose thread to cut. 3 weeks before the birthday disaster, I'd booked a family trip to Maui. First-class tickets, ocean view suite, the works. It was meant to be my big gesture. A desperate attempt to fix years of emotional distance with a week of blue skies and unlimited breakfast buffets. $19,870, paid in full. I opened my laptop and found the reservation under Carter Party of 3. It took all of 10 seconds to cancel it. A bright red banner popped up on the screen. Are you sure you want to cancel this trip? I clicked yes before my hesitation could speak. Ava had been right. Final is good. Final means control. By noon, I was walking back from the post office, a spring in my step that didn't match the gray Ohio sky. The relief felt physical. For once, the silence around me wasn't punishment, it was peace. Then my phone started buzzing. Tyler, your little stunt canceled our Hawaii trip. Are you out of your mind? Emily. Dad. This is insane. We're embarrassed. We told everyone we were going. Tyler. You'll fix this. Today. I didn't reply. Instead, I slipped the phone into my pocket and kept walking. The buzzing continued, one message after another, until finally a new number flashed on the screen. Unknown caller. "Mr. Bennett?" a voice said. "This is the front desk at Maple Grove Motel. There's a man here asking for you. Says he's family." I didn't have to ask who. By the time I got back, Tyler was in the parking lot leaning against his truck like a man rehearsing a fight. His arms were crossed, his jaw tight. When he saw me, he pushed off the hood and stalked over. "You think this is funny?" he shouted. "You humiliate my wife, cut off our money, and now cancel the vacation we paid for?" I stopped a few feet away, keeping my voice calm. "I paid for it, Tyler. Every dollar. That's not the point." He stepped closer, eyes wild. "You can't just pull the plug on our lives because you're having some kind of midlife crisis." I almost smiled. "I'm 65. The midlife part's long gone." He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. I didn't flinch, but before he could say another word, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Hey!" Gus's shout carried from across the lot. He'd shown up just like he promised, checking in on me just in case. He strode over, solid as a brick wall. "You need to back off, son." Tyler turned, startled. "This doesn't concern you." "Man standing in front of a motel room with his name on it," Gus said evenly. "That makes it his business, not yours." Tyler's face flushed. "You don't know what's going on here." "I know bullying when I see it," Gus said. "And I know the cops in this town. Want me to call them? Or you want to leave on your own?" For a moment, no one breathed. Then Tyler let go of my arm, sneering. "This isn't over." "I hope not," I said. "Because next time, it'll be handled by my lawyer." His eyes flickered at that. The mention of Ava Morales, attorney at law, clearly struck a nerve. He spat on the pavement, stomped back to his truck, and tore out of the lot so fast the gravel peppered Gus's boots. Gus turned to me, shaking his head. "You okay?" "Better than I've been in years," I said. He grinned. "You finally stood up, huh?" "More like I stopped kneeling." Back in my room, I added one more line to my notebook under Phase 2. Tyler confrontation handled. No more fear, only facts. I closed the notebook, feeling the kind of tired that comes from relief, not defeat. For the first time in decades, I wasn't scared of being alone. Being alone, I realized, was just another word for being free. I met Ava again 2 days later. The morning was cold enough to sting, but I didn't care. I'd slept better than I had in months, maybe years. There's a strange peace that comes after confrontation, like the silence after a thunderstorm. When you realize the world didn't end, it just got quieter. Her office was the same, small, simple, serious. She motioned me in with a cup of coffee already waiting on the table. "You look better," she said. "I feel better," I admitted. Gus called it my detox phase. Said I'm finally off the emotional payroll. Ava smiled at that. "Good. Because now comes the practical part, protecting what's left and making sure it never happens again." She opened a folder thick with documents. "Here's the plan. First, we formalize control over your finances. I'll draft a trust agreement in your name. That means your assets can only be accessed with your direct approval, no joint accounts, no shared cards, no legal gray areas. Second, we revise your will. It will supersede the old one entirely." "Erase them from it, you mean?" I said. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "I prefer redirect your legacy. You have the right to choose where your life's work goes. Whether that's to charity, scholarships, or something else. It's your decision, not theirs." I nodded slowly. "They'll see it as revenge. They'll call it whatever keeps them from looking in a mirror," she said calmly. That line stuck with me. It was exactly what I needed to hear. Ava walked me through the details. Property deeds, beneficiary forms, insurance policies, investment accounts. Every single document they could weaponize was now being locked behind a wall of legal precision. I signed form after form, each pen stroke steadier than the last. When we paused, she leaned forward. "Mark, I'm also adding a durable power of attorney, someone you trust, who can act for you if you ever can't. Someone who isn't them. Who would that even be?" I asked. She thought for a moment. You mentioned Gus. He seems grounded, or I can assign a fiduciary from my firm, neutral and bound by ethics. No family strings attached. I exhaled. Neutral sounds safer. Good choice, she said. Now, I want you to start gathering evidence not for revenge, but protection. Anything that shows their dependency on your finances. Texts, emails, old receipts. The more history we have, the stronger your legal firewall. That night, back at the motel, I turned my small round table into a crime lab. I laid out every piece of my life like an autopsy. Old tax returns, wire transfers, tuition checks, and birthday receipts. I even found an old email from Tyler thanking me for loaning him money for his business startup, $30,000 that was never repaid. At the bottom of the pile sat a handwritten grocery list, the one from my birthday. Beer, steaks, corn, charcoal. I smiled. What started as a shopping list had become my checklist for freedom. I pulled out my notebook and began logging each piece of evidence with dates and brief notes. It felt methodical, almost therapeutic. Every entry was a step out of the fog and into clarity. When I finished, I texted Ava a photo of the stack. Will this do? Her reply came a minute later. It's perfect. It's your story on paper. The courts like stories with proof. I sat there a long time after that, the motel lamp humming softly beside me. I wasn't a victim compiling complaints. I was a man building a defense, maybe even a future. Before bed, I added one more note under Phase 3. Document everything. Never again mistake love for leverage. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about closure. Legal. Emotional. Final. When Ava called the next morning, her tone was different. Not the usual calm, professional cadence. Softer. Personal. Mark, can you stop by this afternoon? She asked. There's something I'd like to discuss before we finalize the documents. It's not noted, Nest. I agreed, though part of me worried. Maybe she'd found a legal snag. Maybe Emily and Tyler had already started meddling. But when I walked into her office, she wasn't behind the desk. She was sitting across from it, 2 mugs of coffee waiting. Relax, she said before I could ask. You're not in trouble. I just thought you deserved to hear something off the record. I sat. She folded her hands on her lap, took a slow breath, and said, The reason I took your case, it's not just professional. It's personal. That threw me. Personal how? My mother, she said quietly. She went through the same thing you're going through. Only worse. I didn't speak. I just listened. She was a nurse, Ava continued. Worked 60-hour weeks. Raised 3 of us after my father left. My older brother, he was charming, irresponsible, and smart enough to use that against her. When she retired, he convinced her to add him to every account. Said he'd handle her financial stress. Within 6 months, he'd drained almost everything she had. By the time I found out, she was living in a trailer outside Columbus, surviving on canned soup. Her voice didn't crack, but her eyes gave away the rest. I was in law school then, she went on. I used every spare hour to help her get back on her feet. We sued him, froze what little was left, and rewrote everything, her will, her insurance, her pension. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming her dignity. She smiled faintly. She passed last year. But when I read your email, Mark, it felt like déjà vu. Same pattern, different names. I couldn't not take the case. Something in my chest loosened. For the first time since this whole mess began, I felt seen, not pitied, not managed, understood. I said quietly, Guess we both know what it's like to watch someone's kindness get weaponized. She nodded. It's always the same emotional math. They give and give until the balance breaks. You're not alone in this, and you're not crazy for finally saying enough. We spent the next hour finalizing everything. She explained how the trust would go into effect immediately and how I could designate charitable beneficiaries later. She'd already drafted a letter of revocation for Emily and Tyler, removing them from all estate documents. When she slid it across the desk for my signature, she said something I won't forget. Sign this not to cut ties, but to reclaim truth. Family isn't blood, it's behavior. The pen felt steady in my hand. I signed with no hesitation. Afterward, we sat in silence for a moment. Not awkward silence, peaceful. Two people who'd both seen what entitlement could do to love, and who'd both chosen not to let it define them. When I stood to leave, Ava walked me to the door. "You know," she said, "I think my mom would have liked you. You remind me of her favorite saying." "What's that?" She smiled. "Kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-destruction." I laughed softly. "Your mom was a wise woman. She learned the hard way," Ava said. "But she learned. And now so have you." Outside, the sky had cleared, the kind of Ohio afternoon where the sun looks almost new after days of gray. I sat in my car for a few minutes before turning the key, thinking about what she'd told me, about her mother, about mine, about how cycles of guilt and giving can quietly destroy a person unless someone decides to stop it. Maybe that's what I was really doing, not revenge, not even justice, just breaking a cycle that had outlived its purpose. That night, I called Gus, told him about Ava's story, about the trust, about how everything was finally set in motion. He chuckled. "Sounds like you're finally driving your own life again." "Yeah," I said. "And this time, I'm not giving anyone a spare key." It all came to a head 2 weeks later. I was sitting at Murphy's Cafe, the same place Gus and I met every Thursday morning for black coffee and sarcasm, when Emily called again. I hadn't heard her voice since that scene in the motel parking lot, but the silence hadn't been peaceful. It had been tactical. I'd been waiting. I let the phone ring twice before answering. "Dad," she said, her tone brittle and rehearsed. "We need to talk." "About what?" I asked. "You know what? Tyler and I just got a notice from the bank saying we're no longer listed on your accounts or insurance. You can't just erase us like that. It's cruel." "Cruel?" I repeated, keeping my voice level. "Cruel as throwing your father out on his birthday and then calling him when your shopping trip gets declined." "Stop twisting things," she snapped. "We were trying to set boundaries." Everyone. The irony nearly made me laugh. Boundaries are meant to protect people, not control them. You weren't setting boundaries. Emily, you were building walls and calling them love. She went quiet for a second, then shifted gears. "Look, we all said things we didn't mean, but this is humiliating. Everyone knows about the canceled trip. You made us look like idiots." "Emily," I said softly, "I didn't make you look like anything. I just stopped paying for the costume." That must have hit something, because her tone changed, anger giving way to panic. "Please, Dad, just fix this. We're drowning in debt. Tyler's business is not my problem," I said, cutting her off. "You had no problem calling me a burden when it suited you. Now you're calling because you lost access to the one thing you actually valued. My money. You can't do this to family," she said, voice trembling. "Family?" I said. "Family doesn't exploit you. Family doesn't gaslight you into believing you owe them your peace. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing fast, shallow. Then she said something that almost made me pity her. "You'll regret this one day." "Maybe," I said. "But at least the regret will be mine." I hung up. When I looked up, Gus was watching me from across the table. "That the storm?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, "and it just passed." He smiled. "You handled that like a man who finally found the mute button." "More like the off switch," I said, leaning back. A few moments later, Ava walked into the cafe. She'd promised to bring the finalized documents for me to sign in person symbolically, she'd said, so I could end one chapter before starting the next. She slid a folder across the table. "It's all official now. The trust, the will, everything. The charitable foundation paperwork is filed too." "What's it called?" I asked. She smiled. "The Linda Bennett Fund. For seniors who've been exploited by family. I thought that name might mean something to you." It did. It hit like a heartbeat. My late wife's name turned into something that would outlive all of this. I looked down at the documents, neat and final. My signature. My choice. my freedom. Outside the cafe window, life carried on, cars passing, people laughing, no one realizing that, at one corner table, a man was rewriting the terms of his life. Then, Ava's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then turned the screen toward me. It was a local news alert from Maple Grove's online bulletin, community fund, created by local resident to support victims of financial abuse. There it was. My story distilled, anonymized, but unmistakably mine. Gus grinned. Guess the cat's out. I didn't want publicity, I said. Ava nodded. You didn't need it. But stories like yours remind people they can take back control. That's not scandal, that's hope. I watched the cafe crowd react to the headline flashing across their phones. One woman whispered to her friend, "Did you see this? Some guy set up a fund for parents abandoned by their kids." I smiled. Let them read it. Maybe someone out there will see themselves in it before it's too late. For once, I didn't feel angry. Or bitter. Just done. The right kind of done. Later that evening, back at my new apartment, I sat on the balcony as the sun went down. I thought about the house I'd built, the family I'd funded, the man I'd finally become. For years, I'd mistaken survival for loyalty. But now, watching the Ohio sky turn gold and violet, I realized survival wasn't about holding on, it was about letting go. I raised my glass toward the horizon and whispered, "Here's to freedom, and to finally being my own damn person again." It's funny how quiet life becomes once you stop apologizing for existing. 3 months have passed since the day I cut Emily and Tyler off for good. No shouting matches, no manipulative phone calls, just silence. Beautiful, echoing silence. They tried reaching out a few times, at first emails that began with, "We just want to talk," and ended with guilt-ridden paragraphs about family bonds. I didn't reply. Ava told me not to. "They're testing boundaries," she said. "Don't fail the test." I didn't. I moved into a small house just outside Maple Grove, one of those cozy ranch-style homes with a wraparound porch and a maple tree that actually glows red in October. The realtor called it a downsizing. I call it right-sizing space, enough for one man, one dog, and one peaceful mind. Most mornings, I make coffee, step onto the porch, and watch the neighborhood wake up. Kids waiting for the school bus. A jogger with her headphones in. The mailman who waves like clockwork. It's ordinary, but to me, it's sacred. There's a strange kind of pride in building a quiet life after the noise. Sometimes I still think about them, Emily and Tyler. Not with anger anymore, but with clarity. I've come to see how toxic people don't just take your money. They take your reflection. They make you question your own memory, your worth, your sanity. You end up apologizing for things you didn't do, trying to earn back a love that was never conditional, it was transactional. I used to call it loyalty. Now I call it what it was: codependency with good intentions. Last week, I visited the community center that now manages the Linda Bennett Fund. They'd framed the local newspaper article and hung it near the entrance, for seniors reclaiming their independence. The plaque reads, I stood there for a long time, reading the inscription under Linda's name. She would have loved it. She always said the best revenge wasn't punishment, it was peace. The director told me the fund had already helped 12 people, 12 parents who'd been financially trapped or emotionally manipulated by their own families. They'd used the grants to hire lawyers, find housing, start new lives. When I got back to my truck, I sat there for a minute and let that sink in. 12 people. 12 versions of the person I used to be finally breathing again. That's when it hit me. My story had stopped being about revenge a long time ago. It had become about redemption. One evening, as I was fixing dinner, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. For a second, I thought it might be another scam or worse, Emily. But it wasn't. It was a message from Ava. You'll like this, she wrote, followed by a link. I opened it to find a feature in a legal magazine about ethical estate planning. Near the bottom, there was a quote from her. Sometimes justice isn't about taking someone to court. Sometimes it's helping a person rewrite their life on paper so they can finally live it on their own terms. Underneath that was a photo Ava at her desk, smiling softly, and right below it, dedicated to my late mother, and to clients like Mark Bennett, who remind me that courage doesn't always roar. I read it twice before realizing my eyes had blurred. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I stepped outside and watched the sun dip behind the trees. For years, I'd chased validation from people who couldn't even see me, and now, I had it from strangers who understood the same kind of pain. That night, I made a simple dinner: grilled salmon, steamed vegetables, and a glass of wine Linda would have approved of. I sat at the table, opened my journal, and wrote one final line under the words, Phase 3, closure. Forgiveness isn't letting them back in. It's letting yourself walk away without hate. The next morning, I drove down to Flat Rock Lake. The water was still, glassy, reflecting the sky like a promise. I scattered a handful of wildflower seeds I'd brought with me, Linda's favorite mix, and whispered a quiet thank you for her patience, for her warnings, for teaching me that love with boundaries isn't selfish. It's sacred. When I got back to the house, the answering machine was blinking. One new voicemail. It was Emily's voice, fragile and small. Dad, I heard about the fund. I'm sorry. I really am. I listened once, then deleted it. Not out of anger, just acceptance. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some are meant to remind you why you learned to swim. I poured another cup of coffee, sat by the window, and smiled. My story had finally stopped being about what I'd lost. It had become about what I'd reclaimed: my dignity, my peace, my life. There's a kind of peace that doesn't come with silence, it comes with understanding. 3 months after everything ended, I finally began to understand what freedom really meant. It wasn't the absence of noise, or drama, or obligation. It was waking up and knowing every decision I made was mine. The mornings are my favorite now. I sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and let the world happen without me needing to control any of it. The maple leaves outside my window are already turning gold, the kind of color that only comes after the hardest season. I guess I'm turning gold too worn, weathered, but finally honest. I still think about the old house sometimes, not with longing, but with gratitude. It taught me everything I needed to know about generosity, guilt, and how easily love can become currency when you don't set boundaries. For years, I mistook giving for caring, and compliance for kindness. It took losing everything I built for others to realize how little I'd built for myself. The fund in Linda's name has taken on a life of its own. Last week, a local news station did a short segment about it, interviewed one of the women who used the grant to hire a lawyer after her son drained her retirement. She called me afterward, crying, thanking me for saving her life. I told her I didn't save anyone. I just stopped pretending everything was fine. Sometimes, that's enough to start a revolution. The first check I wrote from the fund was to a support group for adult victims of family exploitation. They meet every Thursday night at the community center. Last week, I went for the first time, not as a donor, just as a man who understands. The room was small, folding chairs arranged in a circle, the faint smell of old carpet and coffee. A woman named Helen shared her story about her daughter, how she'd been guilted into co-signing loans and paying medical bills she couldn't afford. "It's like you raise them to be strong," she said, voice trembling, "and they use that strength to push you out of your own life." Everyone nodded. I did too. When it was my turn, I told them about Emily and Tyler, about the birthday, the insults, the night I left, the first motel coffee that tasted like courage. I expected judgment or pity. But what I got instead was understanding. "You didn't lose a family," Helen said. "You just found out who your family isn't." That line stuck with me all week. The next morning, I found myself driving without a destination. The roads outside Maple Grove are quiet this time of year, just open fields, and the sound of wind brushing through tall grass. Somewhere between mile markers 47 and 48, I realized I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was walking toward something new. I parked near Flat Rock Lake, the same place where I'd scattered Linda's wildflower seeds. They'd started to bloom, small, purple and yellow bursts pushing through the soil. I sat on a rock and just watched them sway. I used to think healing was about closure, about slamming doors and walking away. But sitting there, I realized healing was gentler than that. It was about letting things grow again, even in the places that had been burned down. When I got home, There was a letter waiting in the mailbox, no return address. Inside was a small photo. Emily as a child, maybe 8 years old, holding a birthday cake with frosting on her nose. On the back, she'd written 3 words. I remember. Dad. I didn't cry. Not out of coldness, but acceptance. Some wounds don't need to be reopened to be acknowledged. Maybe one day she'll change. Maybe she won't, but either way, I'm done living my life waiting for apologies that may never come. That night, I cooked dinner just for myself, like I do most nights. I opened the windows, let the evening air drift in, and played one of Linda's old records. The house smelled like garlic and rosemary, and for once, that smell didn't remind me of what I'd lost. It reminded me of what I'd built: peace, stability, independence. Before bed, I opened my journal one last time and wrote, I didn't win by taking revenge. I won by refusing to live small. I read it twice, then closed the book. Life doesn't give you closure in a single moment. It gives it to you in pieces: morning coffees, quiet porches, flowers growing in unexpected places. It's slow, but it's real. And if you're patient enough, one day you'll wake up and realize you're not surviving anymore. You're simply living. The biggest lesson I learned from all of this is simple, but it took me 65 years to understand. No is a complete sentence. You don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your peace. For too long, I confused love with sacrifice and guilt with responsibility. I kept telling myself that being a good father meant saying yes, even when it hurt. But boundaries aren't walls, they're doors that open only to people who knock with respect. When I finally walked away, I thought I'd feel lonely. Instead, I felt light. Freedom doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it just sounds like silence after years of shouting. Reclaiming my life wasn't about revenge. It was about recovery, about learning that my worth isn't measured by what I give, but by what I refuse to lose. My dignity, my time, my sanity. If you're listening to this and you've been made to feel guilty for setting limits, remember this: kindness without boundaries isn't kindness, it's self-destruction. You deserve to exist without being someone's emotional or financial supply. You're not selfish for saying, enough. You're self-aware. So now I'm curious, what do you think? Was I wrong for cutting off my daughter and her husband after everything they did? AITA for choosing peace over family? And have you ever dealt with someone who made you feel guilty for simply taking care of yourself? Share your thoughts or your own survival story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you handled it. Because maybe, just maybe, the more we talk about it, the less alone we all feel.